yes, organizations. Anybody have thoughts or maybe at a point where they're about ready to share? Anybody on the call today? Like I said, that August session is wide open. Yours for the taking. Did anyone on the call attend the Data Vault Consortium, which was virtual this year in late May? There were at least 3 people from our group that spoke at that consortium. Christopher and Jeff presented the West Data story, and then Veronica talked about her Data Vault on Snowflake implementation. Was there anybody else that was able to attend? I was. Wondered if anybody had feedback on that. It was the first year it was all virtual, so my feedback was I'd rather go to Vermont and spend time in the mountains, but the topics were good, and I think it was more well attended than any previous consortium, just because it made it easy to attend. You didn't have to physically travel, but I look forward to that trip every year when we've had it in person. Nobody else went? Oh, and one more reminder, we are going to record this today, so Matt, you can start that at any time.
Mike, the recording has started, and okay. Only one comment so far. Veronica, thanks for saying on sensitive data masking, access control. If you want to clarify if that's something you want to present on in the future, we welcome it.
Of course, that's something passionate to us, and we have presented on that topic before. Are you offering, Veronica? If anybody has thoughts or willing to participate in a discussion about that, maybe we'll just have a roundtable discussion rather than a presentation. So email us your thoughts. You can email Matt or reply to the invite, or myself, or both, and let us know what your thoughts are around that. That is a good topic, and it's becoming more and more important all the time. Keeping our data secure while sharing it with those who need to know. Those two requirements seem to be at odds with each other, and some organizations are doing that really well, and others are just learning. So that's a good suggestion.
And Veronica, thanks for being willing to take a stab at it. I'll follow up with you on that later on.
Great. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Planting. Mike and I had the privilege of working together at 2 previous organizations, and now a third, as he's now with ClickFunnels. So we were at Micron and Blue Cross together, and then he's now at ClickFunnels, and they're building a data warehouse from scratch, and feels like they're at a point where they can share some of their journey. So with that, Mike, I'm going to stop sharing, and you can take over and introduce yourself, and then go from there. Thank you, Mike.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can.
You can see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks for the opportunity to present. I'm going to be sharing about DBT today, and DBT I love as a data transformation tool, and also an enabler of building a data warehouse, and that's pretty much going to be my focus. I'll share a little bit of our journey, but I really just want to show off this tool and the powerful ways it can automate some of the core functions of building a data warehouse. So let me go full screen here. So the topic is DBT as a central hub of a data analytics ecosystem. ClickFunnels, just a little bit about the company. It's a website and sales funnel builder. If you haven't heard of it, you should check it out, especially if you're an entrepreneur. It can really help drive traffic to your site or your product or your information product, whatever your platform. It's really a good way to get visitors, generate leads, and get customers. So check it out if you haven't heard of it. But I don't want to spend too much time there. Our team, some of you may know Mike O'Toole. He's my manager. He's awesome. We have one BI analyst, Tracy Rogers, and data engineers, Jared, who's on the line, and myself. And quickly about our BI journey, I'd say we're very young as a team and very young in regard to business intelligence and data warehousing. Mike O'Toole was really brought on to mature that area, and they've done a great job. And many of you already know this pattern, but the analysts are focused on gathering requirements, really understanding key business process and the source data, and developing the metrics. We as data engineers are focused on data integration, building out the data warehouse in a supportable manner, and building out models. So the focus has been just delivery, get metrics out the door. We're using Tableau on source data basically, but obviously that's not the best scenario. And now that we've matured and we have learned DBT, we're using that as the central location of building out these models on top of the data warehouse structure. And so it's been a journey, work in progress, but we're starting to get some traction, and we're about to do a second version of this with some different data ingestion replication tools, and then probably another implementation of DBT now that we've learned the tool and gotten our feet wet. So this is the first slide. Contextually, this is what's important. This is where DBT belongs. At its core, it is a data transformation tool. It's for munging your data in a very efficient, supportable, pattern-based manner. I'm leveraging it as an enabler of the whole data warehouse to keep us organized, to enforce housekeeping, and to ensure data integrity, and a lot of other features that I'm going to talk about. By the way, I'm looking at the screen because I can see people over here and my presentation's here, so that's why I'm going back and forth. So how does DBT fit into the data warehouse paradigm? Like I said, it's a transformation tool, but it is really good at simplifying the building of an integrated data warehouse platform. And I wanted to call out some of the key features or enablements of a data warehouse. Non-volatile, time-varied integrated data lineage, subject-oriented, and idempotent. I can do all these things with DBT. Also, I think even more importantly, it's very easy to test your data for data integrity, uniqueness, nullness, referential integrity, a ton of other test utilities that I don't have to write out in SQL. Source freshness testing. A lot of times you're doing high water marks or whatever it may be to check your latest pull from your source. Again, with DBT, it's automated. It's primarily a SQL-based tool, so the ramp-up time isn't that tough. There's some configuration things you pass into YAML script, which is not a big deal at all. And it uses Jinja, which is a templating language. So, and I'm going to be talking about this, and this is very powerful. If any of you have worked with dynamic SQL, it's better than that, but it's same concept. And when I say dry concept, many of you know, is do not repeat yourself. And so in data warehousing, you're repeating yourself a lot. You may be duplicating your dimensions, or you may be duplicating some of your key business rules, and then you have multiple places to maintain these things, some key joins. So the goal, my passion in data warehousing is to simplify and to keep it dry. And this really helps it. And generating documentation. I think everyone hates documentation, right? But this generates it for you, which is great. I mean, you have to drop in, if you want to do some custom descriptions in plain English, obviously you have to write that out, but it gives you a very systematic way of doing that. And by the way, I'm going to go really fast because I have a lot to show you. So I'm going to hold questions till the end, but I really do want to answer your questions, but I want to paint the picture of DBT and then take questions at the end. So I apologize for that, but there's a lot to get through. So specific to ClickFunnels, and this is kind of representative of the DBT best practices, but not exactly. We have a base data, which pretty much represents unchanged source data. That would be a schema inside that I have DBT build for me. I have a core schema, which I use to munge everything up in regard to, think of all about your temporary tables that you write into, all the various steps, all the different steps of ETL. We're kind of shoving it all into this core area to abstract it from our Infomart schema, which is visible to our analysts who ingest that into a Tableau extract. So Infomart, facts, dimensions, core, munging, base, source data, unchanged, essentially. So I'm going to jump past that. This is our environment. So on the left, you have sources. We have 3 ingestion tools. This has been a huge pain point for us, and we're actually in a proof of concept looking at various tools right now. So we want to have one big pretty box for data ingestion tool with one tool, and that may be a pipe dream, but that's what we're shooting for. Object storage on S3, data warehouse and Redshift, and DBT is that green box. Base, think of those as schemas, a base schema, a core schema, and dimensional models, and DBT helps automate the building of those 3 schemas and everything that goes into that. And then on top of that, we have various reporting tools. The goal is, though, to use DBT to manage all our business rules. So to get as much as we can out of Tableau. Tableau just ingests the tables. Maybe you might do a star schema join on some primary keys in Tableau, but whenever possible, push rules and logic down to the data warehouse, down to the dimensional models, or earlier in core if you need to. So I'm going to take you on a tour through DBT, develop, test, document, scheduling, and Dataops. DBT has some really awesome Dataops tools that I want to show off as well. So develop. Some key concepts, and I don't want to bore you to death with reading off slides, but I'm going to do that for a little bit here. DBT simplifies the building and management of your ELT transformation layer. Conceptually, DBT is a bunch of SQL statements. It's a model is a SQL statement. Select star from, that is, in most basic terms, that's a model. Don't think of modeling in data science or anything like that. It's just a SQL statement that renders as a view, a table, or an incremental table. DBT job run will build these models in a destination warehouse. So you have a job that runs and it loads up all these SQL statements and executes them in the correct order based on some references we have that I'll show you later. Materialized as a full refresh, incremental, or view. And think of it like this: models can incrementally build on each other, similar to various objects in a SSIS package. You have all those different objects, or just simply thinking of multiple CTEs within a SQL query. And there's a cloud offering of DBT, which abstracts all the management for you if you stood it up on AWS or Google Cloud, or you can self-host. So here's a visual. This is a DBT model. There's configuration in the beginning. If you're running on Redshift or GCP or Snowflake, you can set your distribution sort keys, which is pretty awesome. And because again, it will build the DDL and generate that, or build that object for you. But at its core, it's a CTE statement. You have with, as, select, and then you select from your CTE. That's the same structure you use most every places. And I'll talk about this later, but notice I've swapped out the table names with these referential, this reference statement. This is another model SQL statement within DBT. So simple example, here's the UI. And by the way, I'm trying to stay out of a live presentation because there's so much content. I don't want to get lost navigating, or try to navigate through the different areas. This is cloud-based UI if you're doing the cloud offering, and this is so simple, so nice. I can compile here. It will give me big red warnings if I'm trying to go to another model that doesn't exist or that's I can't link to. It's very, very nice. It's a folder structure. where you can write macros. Think of those as like functions that you can call over and over again. This is your core models, snapshots, slowly changing dimension that it will build for you. Tests that I can define and call on top of the out-of-the-box testing, and I'll cover all this. This is just a compiler error. I misspelled accounts on purpose, and I need just the regularly spelled model. It will tell me if the relationship doesn't exist through these models. And again, data lineage is built into dbt Cloud. So as you run a job, it's going to run these things based on the reference integrity in which you've defined. Super easy to do. Materializations, already talked about these. It will generate a full table load, incremental load, or view. All you have to do is call out the configuration when you write a SQL statement. Materialize as table, materialize as view, or materialize incremental. Your materialization depends on storage and performance requirements. You know, if a lot of things aren't going to be hitting it, just materialize as a view. If it's shared across multiple ETL branches, we'll land it as a table or an incremental load, things like that. Or you can configure at the project level too. If you want a central location within dbt, you have a project YAML file, and you could centralize how you materialize things and inherits it by folder. So dbt keeps you very organized. It's very easy to support and maintain. I already talked about this. Okay, one cool feature. Here's an example of, a lot of you have tried to capture history. You're capturing every version of the change of the record as it comes in, slowly changing dimension type 2. This is an example of that. So I have a dimension I developed called DAccount, our dimension for accounts. And it's just select star from DAccount. But when I load up this snapshot, it's going to snapshot every time I do a run. It's going to snapshot every change that it sees. And I didn't have to code this in SQL. That's all I did. I said target database, target schema. What's the unique key? What strategy do I want to use? So let's say I don't have a good timestamp updated at field. If I don't have that and that concept's not in the table, well, I can say check all columns, and it will check all the columns for me. I don't have to write one big, massive MD5 SHA-1 hash statement with all the columns concatenated. It does it for me. Behind the scenes, I think it's using MD5. And I just say check all columns, or I could have called out the number of which columns I want to do. And then on the right, you can see that it generated this for me, and I just wanted to call out, it created these columns for me. dbt updated at, valid from, and valid to. So if you're familiar with SQL temporal tables, it's a similar concept. It's kind of like that, and you can find out your active record by just doing where dbt valid to equals null. But what's awesome is I didn't have to code this in SQL, so you can see there the chance for fat fingering things, introducing errors. It's very templatized and systematic, and really speed things up. There are also a number of really nice macros that are built in. I'm just going to click on this. Let me see, go back here and just show you some of the dbt documentation just for a minute. The resources are incredible, but these are some of the functions, like things that they've turned into macros for you that you can call to speed up things you might be typing out SQL. Like if you need to pivot data, if you need to unpivot data, if you need to strip off things off of URLs in your SQL, split part, finding the last day, stuff that, if you're a data engineer, you've done a lot of times, but this will do it for you. And I'm going to come back to schema tests later. Jinja, I also want to spend some time on this. This is really important in regard to DBT. So let me jump out here. Rather than show you our own example, I'm just going to run through one they have on their site. Here's a basic SQL statement that you're all familiar with. Just imagine it said from raw payments, but they're using the referential integrity to say this is an existing model in DBT, call this model so that it can build out the ETL correctly when you do a job run. But it's a basic SQL statement. And now with Jinja, you could do this. Notice there's 3 sum statements. You can do, this is Jinja right here. I can say for payment methods in bank transfer, credit card, gift card, generate a sum statement for each of those, which is great. It's really cool. And it gets even better with Jinja. I could set a sort of dictionary at the top or variables and set them right there, and then call that for payments and payment methods, and then finish out your SQL statement. That's Jinja. You can look it up. It's a very powerful tool. So if you combine SQL with Jinja, you have quite a bit you can do inside DBT, and it really is nice. Another thing I'm excited about with DBT is I've always wanted to automate business rules and the management of business rules without implementing some big business rules manager. And I've done that in the past through using dynamic SQL, where I can pull in some statements into dynamic SQL and just loop over it many times. But with this SQL file is just it's not really a SQL, but I store it as a .SQL file. But you can see that I have a bunch of macros. You can consider these functions where I've just written the case statement, and I can reference this case statement in my actual model. So this model is called Core F Account Attribution Calcs, which turns out to be a view or a table that renders. And I'm just calling that macro. The nice thing is if I need to implement this business rule in a different SQL model, I can call it again, and there's no risk of me mistyping or an error of copying and pasting and introducing something that's not an exact match of what this business rule originally was, which is great. Another thing I wanted to show off is pattern-based SQL code automation. Some of you have probably done that with dynamic SQL, calling it via stored procedure, calling a stored procedure that has dynamic SQL in it, so you can maybe build out your base layers of your underlying data, or just to speed things up. So there's a similar idea here. And I do want to actually jump into our DBT implementation to show you. So we pull all our data from our data is replicated from our application database over to Redshift. We land it as its raw data, and I need to get it into DBT. And so I have this base layer here, and we call our source data mothership. So you can see that I have a number of mothership source data type tables. And this would be a lot of coding if I wrote all the SQL out. But all I have to do is call the macro I defined, pass in the schema, pass in the table name, and it uses the macro that has either you can put very simple SQL in there, or it can be very complicated. But the point is it's the same SQL over and over again. And and this is more complex. Again, it doesn't have to be this complex because I'm calling multiple dictionaries, but this is what it looks like. So I have a bunch of dictionaries depending on the schema I'm using. And then the core SQL here, you can see that I'm setting distribution keys, sort keys based on these dictionaries. And this is the same SQL that's called over and over again for generating these things. And they can be ran concurrently, which is awesome. This specifically has to do some deduplication of data, which was an issue in our data ingestion pipelines, and this was a workaround for that. So that's pattern-based coding. Again, in DBT is just calling the same macro over and over and over again. Next, test. So when you think of data freshness, how old is my data that I pulled over from our mothership database? Well, sometimes that can take some work to check, but if I define, so we have credit card processing data from Stripe, and it goes into our dev, our production database is actually called dev on Redshift, and it goes into our Stripe schema. I can say, well, check the received dat field over all my tables that are pulled into the Stripe schema from source Stripe, our credit card processing system. I didn't have to code that out. It will check for me. And I said, warn me after 7 hours and give me an error after 24 hours. So my ETL doesn't have to fail if it's just a little bit behind. It'll just say, hey, you're 7 hours stale. But if I get to 24, then I'm going to get a big red warning and be notified, which is really cool. Along the lines of automated testing, you have, along your sources, notice that it's an extension of what I just showed you. And then I can call it the tables that we have in the Stripe schema that we bring in. So here's charges. I can set a key or set any column, but in this case, it's my primary key. And I can say, hey, DBT, warn me when it's not unique. Or if I have duplicates introduced into my system, go ahead and I could put an error here as well, and it would fail. Again, I just wanted to warn. But if I get duplicates or nulls in columns where I expect it to be there, I can check that, and I didn't have to write SQL. So if you want to spend more of your time modeling and building out these infomarts and doing analytics, this really does abstract a lot of the work for you. There's also referential integrity, check a PK and target against source, and accepted values. You know, if you, I don't know, had, checking states or something, you could list those values out, and if anything came through that wasn't in that list, it would give you a warning. There's even more schema tests. So I'm not going to go into these, but it's the same idea. It's like a macro I can put in there, so I can make sure I have an equal row count between source and target. You know, how often do we do that as data engineers? Well, you can simplify that. Equal values, expression is true, at least one of these values in this table. So when this table is generated, whether it's incremental, whether it's a full load, whether it's a view, it can run through all these tests. You know, even conditional tests like not null where, like checking specific not null cases. And yeah, it's really incredible. It really speeds up what you can do. I talked about, you saw some of the testing examples before, but you can do custom data tests too. So this is an example where you can write a SQL statement, and DBT, the testing function for these custom tests says, write a SQL statement, and if any record returns from the SQL statement, then it's a failure. It's a failed test. So the test expects no records to return. So you can write these all day long, right? You could write as many of these tests as you want, and when DBT runs, it will run through and check all these. And if any record returns, you can fail your ETL. And those are considered custom data tests. And if you think back to business rules, you could test some of the business rules you've implemented as well. Documentation. So if you remember, I mentioned these ref relationships. So I think it might be worthwhile for me to just show you what this looks like. So here's core MMR upgrades and downgrades. So I'm going to go, and we're still working on, best practice, how we want to organize things. But essentially, we have base, core, and InfoMarts. But I'm going to go to core and look at our core ETL around MMR. And you can see that for core MMR, MRR upgrades, downgrades, we have this model. So when you see that reference, this is what it's looking towards. And it's saying, use this model when you're running this SQL statement. Likewise, use this model. So if I didn't put it in ref, then it would actually go to the actual SQL table. And the referential integrity wouldn't be maintained. That's not exactly right. It's not referential integrity, it's just referencing models. But in documentation that's built, you have a visual to see what tables go into, what DBT models go into the DBT model you're building downstream. And I'm going to show you the big picture in a second. But this was automatically, this core MMR upgrades, downgrades by day is this SQL model, and you can see how documentation automatically generates a visual data lineage representation. And this is automatically built for you out of the box, as long as you use these references.
In my quick time, maybe open it for questions in about 10 minutes. Do you think?
Sure.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I'm almost there. Cool. Automated documentation. So it will automatically describe the models, data types, nullability, descriptions, business rules if you've defined them, where the model's referenced, if there's any tests that you've defined around the model, any dependencies upstream and downstream dependencies, and I'll show you the code. So here's an example of some custom descriptions that I wrote that automatically get pulled into the documentation that's automatically built. So if I have a plain English description, like here for D attribution, other attributes, this dimension, I said it's unclassified, add channels from attribution app. Well, when the documentation built, it went here. So if you have analysts or even business users that need plain English descriptions, you as a developer can define them here, and it automatically gets built into the browser documentation. You don't have to post it on a SharePoint site, on Confluence, build a spreadsheet, all the attempts, of documentation that we traditionally use, it builds it for you. Likewise, here's a custom column description. This email represents unattributed visitors. See where it went? These are the column definitions. So I think that's pretty cool. And I also am going to jump into documentation real quick just to show you some other things. Okay, so I'm going to go into a model. Let's MR. So this is what was built for me automatically. Details around the table definition. I didn't define a description here, but it gives me all the columns. If I had test define or custom descriptions, they would show. It gives me all the references, upstream, downstream. And an analyst could come in and look at the SQL, and they wouldn't have to go and look at the DDL, and they can look at the compiled version, which is really cool. So scheduling, just going to give you some visuals here. Here's a basic definition. This is our data warehouse load. You can multi-thread it, so that means if you have tables that aren't dependent on each other, I can run up to 15 threads. It's not restricted to by just one table at a time, one thread. It'll auto-generate documentation. You just saw this. It can check source freshness, which I'll be showing you. It can have a run timeout, and you can defer to previous run states for comparisons. Don't try and take all this in, but this, I have a 10-step, 10 job task for this job. And you can see that the syntax is very powerful. You have runs, tests, macro calls to grant permissions on schemas if a new table or view is built. And that slowly changing dimension I'm just doing on one table right now, I can call that in the job. Dataops. Okay, so source freshness. This, I showed you the definition of this earlier. And when you get done with the job, you can just click on this link and it will tell you if anything's stale. Right now, everything's okay. But these are all the different unique data sources I'm pulling from. And if any of them, if I've defined source freshness, if it was out of sync, it would tell me. And you can get notified. And data health visibility. So data health visibility, this is called an exposure. And I've passed an iframe of the DB exposure into Tableau as a Tableau pane. And that green check mark will not be green if any of the tests have failed or if any of my data is stale. So if you need to build trust on the business layer, your business users looking at Tableau or other tools, you can put a pretty green check mark in your Tableau report that's tied back to DBT that will tell the user, hey, I don't know if you should trust this data because it failed a test or it's not fresh. You know, contact data engineering, which is great. Slimci, Slim continuous integration. It has, and we use this with GitHub. If I create a pull request, it will take what I developed that's different than the production, the master branch. It will spin up a schema dedicated to that pull request, test my code. If it fails, then it makes it difficult for me to merge. I can still merge, but it will tell me if there's a problem. That way I'm not introducing errors into prod. And this is an automatic process. So this actually saves us a lot of heartache because, you know, we'll test things locally in the UI, then we'll create a pull request, then it tests it from a production standpoint in a separate schema. And if it passes and we merge and close the request, then it automatically deletes that schema that was dedicated to that pull request. It's very smooth. And if you think about a team with multiple developers moving your code in and out of GitHub and doing this approach really helps from the DevOps, DataOps perspective. Extra stuff, you can call macro, you can call things like store procedures from models. I can do Redshift database maintenance, notification via Slack. You can do Python functions, webhooks. You can see data like a CSV. And final thoughts, I'm leveraging DBT for the full data lifecycle. I'm maximizing DBT. So data freshness, integrity, business rules, transformation, testing, documentation, all that stuff. But the one thing, although you can do this in some workarounds, it's really not intended to move data from source to your raw data on your data warehouse. That's better something like Fivetran or Meltano or Airbyte. Those type of tools, I would say, don't try to use DBT to do your data integration pipeline. Do it, you know, so land your data as raw, then have DBT pick it up. Or some companies just use it as a data modeling tool. I mean, you can throw it on top of a data vault structure or whatever you want, and then just model on top of that. You know, just build your facts dimensions, call it good, and then use all the testing and the documentation. I'd recommend DBT Cloud. I have not implemented DBT like command line, putting it up into AWS myself. I haven't done that. I can't really say whether that's a ton of work or not. And it's very, very cheap actually for DBT Cloud. And this really raises knowledge transfer throughout your team, and helps bring everyone into the data world that you're in, and you can build models that are from a business perspective. It really helps. So I went really fast. Thank you for holding your questions. I hope you were able to see the power of this tool. I'm sure lots of you have lots of questions, so fire away.
You can submit those either via the chat or preferably just unmute and do it verbally.
Hey, Mike, not a question, but just great job. Been very interested in understanding more about DBT and possible usage. I just wanted to say, especially appreciate that last reference about that last point about best practice being not to use DBT for ETL into your data warehouse. So just wanted to share that. I certainly appreciate it. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I tried that and was able to do it by pulling from MySQL to S3 using copy statements from Redshift, and it's just not performant. So yeah, use those tools, Fivetran, Airbyte, etc.
Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Sorry. It's Veronica. So I have a question around testing. So there is those custom tests where, if it's returns something that it fails. And I know there's been talk about kind of like redirecting, because sometimes you just want to redirect rows that match whatever test criteria somewhere else and continue processing. Has that been implemented? Have you tried that?
I haven't tried that. And I vaguely remember some type of redirection on a webinar I watched, but I actually haven't taken time to do that. But I think there probably is a way. It might be, you know what, they are actually building a process for you to do one of those custom data tests and to automatically create a table that shows the records that did not pass the data test. That's not necessarily a redirect, it's just kind of a reveal of the problem records. So I can't say yes, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone out there has something for that.
Thank you.
Yep.
One question on the chat, Christopher asked if you've onboarded new staff into the environment and what challenges you see bringing somebody up to speed.
So yes, and Jared's actually on the line, and he's the other data engineer at ClickFunnels. And Jared and I have been in similar worlds in past jobs, so we have similar background work together. So I think it's been fairly easy. And Jared's a great data engineer besides. So, but I want to just couch that in it's as easy as you've set it up. Essentially, you don't need all these layers, right? I showed you core, I showed you base, core, and Infomarts, but really all it is a SQL statement. And you can design that structure as easy as you want, pull from source, model, and then it will render in your data warehouse. So if you design it in an intuitive way, if you set up your folder structure and your schemas in a linear fashion, I'd say it's super easy to onboard. I'm leveraging DBT. I'm not even leveraging DBT to its fullest. I'd say it's more of an intermediate implementation. So it just depends on how deep you want to go into this tool. And I come from a Microsoft perspective and heavy SSIS, SSAS. And this, for me, I mean, maybe not on the cube perspective, but just basic facts and dimensions. This thing is so powerful. It's like a Swiss Army knife, and it has abstracted much of what I did in SSIS, which I considered the same thing, but now it's cloud-based, it's all SQL-based, it has the documentation, it has the data lineage, it has the built-in tests. I can speed up my coding so fast with DBT. You can tell I love this tool.
Well, just to follow on to that, what was your learning curve?
Okay, so yeah, so I'll give some background here. We know Mike from other jobs, and we're very interested in Data Vault. And we were this close to purchasing Warescape, and COVID hit, and so budgets froze, I think, for a lot of companies. And so we had made the decision to actually get Warescape, and we're ready for Data Vault, and again, the budget froze. So we decided to build from scratch. And I chose DBT as my building tool because of the things you see here. And I was making good progress and coding a lot of those. I coded satellites, links, hubs, the transactional history, all that. And I had dictionaries that passed in for each table on business keys to use and what's my load date time and what's my updated at. But I just couldn't cross the finish line. And we needed to get some valuable metrics out. So we just kind of reverted to this base data, which is raw, core munged up, and then basic star schema. We are still interested in Data Vault. We haven't abandoned that. But it's actually, we needed to grow up a little bit in the sense of really understand our data, get our data pipelines from source to Redshift working efficiently. We needed this time basically to get our grounding, and I'm kind of glad we did, because now with the knowledge we have now and the tools we have now, in the future, if we explore Data Vault again, I think it'll be that much more impactful with the knowledge we have. So, but with that said, we're not feeling a huge need for Data Vault because we're able to spin up the basic InfoMarts via DBT.
Both Veronica and Jared called out the DBT community. So as an open source tool there are a couple communities that you can refer to there. So just drawing everyone's attention to that. One more question came in from Mike Tulin. Are your analysts accessing the DBT created documentation? And if so, is that from an internal site or some reporting interface? And can you figure, can that be configured? Oh, sorry, it's kind of a separate question. Can it configure handling changes to source system schemas? Two separate questions there.
Yeah, so it's my desire that analysts would access this more, and even like subject matter experts on the business side. There's a bit of culture and training required to say, hey, you know what? You have this incredible documentation site that will show you my compiled SQL code, that will show you my English description of the business rules and the tables, where you can see this data lineage graph if you're wondering where in the world did this data come from. So to answer your question, yes, we have our analyst Tracy and Mike do jump into documentation to see the compiled SQL code, because there's a relationship between us, right? Like sometimes they're creating their own SQL, or they put it in Tableau and then they'll pass it off to me. I'll optimize it, and then we'll work pretty collaboratively in DBT. I'll pull up DBT, if there's changes, we'll work on it together. I can commit it and test it, and so they'll use the documentation to kind of see, hey, what did Mike actually implement? Once it's been committed, and if there's any issues, they can do the research themselves instead of having to go to a query tool and open up the DDL or the view, see how the view's defined. It's all in one place. But I think it's a culture of using the tool and you have to make the tool, the layout of the tool and your documentation and the way you conceptually organize these things in a business perspective, in a logical manner. One neat thing with DBT Cloud, for every developer license, 50 people get read-only access. So that means 50 people can get to the documentation.
Okay, last call for questions. And we'll do a wrap up.
Thanks, Mike, for the answer on that question. And then just, I guess, the second question in terms of, can you configure how DBT handles changes to source schema?
Oh yeah, sorry. about that. So in regard to schema change, like, are you talking about pulling in, like, let's say a schema, you're saying a table in a schema, meaning like a table will get more columns or change data types, or?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So yes, it does. And that's, I should have mentioned that. That's an actual very powerful feature of DBT. Is it might be with incremental loads or it might be with snapshotting. I'm not sure which one, but it will pull in the new column, and it will change the data type, or change the data type. Let's say you're going from, a small int to a big int, or you're going from a varchar 100 to a varchar max. Like, it can handle that. If there's something way off, like a huge change going from text to integer, it might add a new column. I'm not sure, but it's really powerful. Yeah, and that was a big deal when I was initially testing out DBT, trying to create data vault, handling schema management, schema changes on the fly. So yes, it does do that.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
To clarify on that, so it does it automatically, or does it identify that change and then you have to, as a developer, have to take action?
Automatically.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, anyways, like I said, I love this tool, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I always learn, as I help people. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Okay, thanks. And there's Mike's LinkedIn profile right there. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Make sure we end on time for the final, or for the top of the hour. So first of all, thank you, Mike, for sharing with us. It's always valuable to see how other people are getting the job done. And I appreciate you sharing your insights. Same with the rest of your team. Hats off to you there. Again, if you are not receiving our invitations or emails, please let Matt know. Matt Payne is managing the membership and the invites. So hopefully you received one, and that's why you're here today. But if you know of somebody that wants to get on that list, reach out to him. Same for any feedback on this forum. And it looks like for future topic, I didn't list it on here, but it looks like the proposal is to talk about security. So we'll do that in August or September. And we have had both Simplot and PetIQ suggest that they may be willing to share in the future as well. So look for our emails coming up here in the next couple of weeks when we announce the August topic. And again, if you have one, if you have a topic that you'd like to present or that you'd like to see presented, or maybe just have an open dialogue about, please let us know. With that, that ends our session for today. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you in August. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.